everybody. Welcome to Economics with the Honorable David M. Walker. I'm Nick Palavito. I'll be your moderator for today's show. And today's discussion is going to be a very interesting discussion based on this. Problem number one is the top 1% in the United States own 54% of all the stocks in the United States of America. Now, some commentators say, oh, I don't see a problem with it. But other commentators that existed in Cuba, China, and Russia all had revolutions over it. So it is a problem, whether the 1% want to admit it or not. You can't hog all the bananas, including in Europe, the United Kingdom, same problem. But here it gets worse, not better. Here's worse. Top 10% own 93% of all the stocks in the United States. So if you're in the top 10%, you're doing quite well in the United States of America. And then here's the other problem, the people that we want to contribute more to society, the bottom 50%. The bottom 50% own 1% of stocks in the United States. So we have a very unequitable distribution in the United States of America. Top 1% own 50%, bottom 50% own 1%. So with that, we're going to bring in the Honorable David M. Walker, the former Comptroller General of the United States, to address this. And how are we going to squeeze more bananas out of the bottom 1% that have nothing to solve the national debt problem? Or are we actually going to have to tax the rich? Can you actually imagine that, taxing the rich? And so, David, what are your thoughts?
Well, let's just say everybody's stock account is worth less today than it was 4 days ago. Market's being hit pretty hard today, but in any event, look, I understand the data that you're using is from the Federal Reserve. The only thing that I'm not sure about is, does that consider beneficial ownership, through for example, retirement plans, including 401k and other types of defined contribution plans, where, individuals may have significant positions in stocks, but they're not the direct holder of the stock. It could be through a mutual fund or whatever else. But the bottom line is this. I mean, there's no question that there's a growing gap between the haves and have-nots. Especially with regard to wealth, but also in connection with income. When you talk about the future with regard to revenues, we're going to have more revenues as a percentage of GDP in order to be able to stabilize debt at a reasonable and sustainable level. You can get part of that through comprehensive tax reform that simplifies it and that also makes it more enforceable. And at the same point in time, one of the things that we're going to have to do is that we're going to have to get more people paying something in income taxes, and the wealthy are going to have to pay more. Right now, over 40% of individuals who file an individual income tax return in the United States pay nothing on income taxes, and 20% get a rebate because of refundable credits, such as the Earned Income Tax Credit, Child Care Tax Credit, etc. They do pay social insurance taxes for Social Security and Medicare, and those are very regressive taxes, but they don't pay income taxes. And income taxes are what funds the basic roles and responsibilities of the federal government. And of course, for social insurance taxes, you get something for it. You get the retirement, the survivors, the disability, and the healthcare programs that go with it. So at the same point in time, we clearly are going to have to get more revenues from the wealthy, but we also have to recognize the wealthy don't make their money through wages. They make their money through investments. And so that means that we're going to have to relook at the 1.8 trillion deductions, exemptions, credits, and exclusions from the tax code to significantly streamline and simplify those so we can keep the tax rate as low as possible. But we may have to start talking about reducing and or eliminating the difference between the income tax rate and the capital gains tax rate, because after all, you don't end up paying social insurance taxes on on capital gains. So there is a built-in differential in that regard. Those are just a few beginning thoughts. Of course, now, people are concerned about what does the future hold, the possibility of recession and other things, which is one of the things that's rattling the market right now.
Yeah, well, with that, we have a huge panel that's going to be joining us today to discuss this important issue. When 1% own all the bananas and the bottom 50% don't have any bananas, it actually caused revolution throughout the world. That was China, Russia, Cuba, et cetera. So it's not a good thing, but we'll see what our panel has to say. First of all, we're going to bring in from Wall Street Hackers, the head of the Wall Street Hackers television show on the Pod TV network, Peter Bennett, is going to be joining us. We're also going to have Kim Calhoun, who's the president of the Pod TV network in the Raleigh-Durham area. Shaquille Latner, who's a former hedge fund manager who sucked so much money out of the economy, I don't think he works anymore. And then we have Dan Worthington, who's a former professor and associate dean at the University of South Dakota School of Law. And we also have Sasha Starr, who heads the other show, Modern Investments. We'll see what he has to say about the 1% owning everything. And then Rick Rosner, who's recently joined the 1%, at least the top 10% from California. His hands up, and maybe he has a comment.
Yeah, in addition to the 1% owning everything, it's the olds who own everything. People 45 years and older in the U.S. own 15 out of every 16 privately held dollars. 94% of the wealth in the U.S. is owned by Gen X and boomers.
Okay.
Sorry, if I can.
Yeah, I think
Sorry, go to Dan.
Okay. So a few comments about what David said first, and then I'm going to give my position. I would point out, first of all, the comment about the growing disparity between the wealthy and the have-nots. I'm not overly concerned with that, and I'll explain it based on my original position, because if those haves have generated their wealth by producing wealth in society, then that's actually a plus. But that gets back to my original point. I would agree, though, on several of the points. We need more revenues. Obviously, we need to tax more. The capital gains rate probably should be the same as the income tax. It just seems fair. Why should one person be making more than the other in terms of, paying more than the other? It just seems equal. On the other side, I always point out on Wall Street Hackers that there is not enough money in the world to tax to pay for our deficits. Now, Social Security, yes. What you could do is, if you just got rid of the cap on Social Security, that might cover 50%, some people say more, of the Social Security deficit. And there are adjustments that could be made there that wouldn't really affect society. But Medicare is another thing, because as David has said, it's probably $125 trillion. I talk on my show every episode, I'd say, about the fact that it's not $35 trillion. The media keeps saying it. It's $125 trillion. It's a much better estimate, and we need to use GAAP accounting, and that's going to affect society. So here's my main points that I was coming in with. One, I'm not concerned so much with wealth disparity in society. I think we've always had wealth disparities. You can go back to the 1800s, there were wealth disparities. But the key point is there upward mobility or not? I don't think, although I am a little concerned that there could be a revolution, socialism could take over, which would be a disaster. But I don't think that's going to happen if people have a feeling that they could move upward. And that really depends on how we're structured. If we had a free and fair capitalist society, likely people would feel like, even though I can't afford a house today, but I can work towards it. And work, and the bottom point I'll say there is, people, if they feel like they have purpose, because that's really what drives people. And if you feel like you have a purpose, you have an incentive to work hard, unlike in some communist countries and a lot of times in socialist societies, where you can actually move up, then you're getting ahead. And the final point is people have actually gotten ahead, even though there's more wealth disparity. So I'll let others join in, and maybe I'll add more later.
Can I mention something real quick? I mean, part of the issue is do people feel that the future will be better than the past?
Exactly what I said.
Yeah, right. It's just a different way of saying what you said, but I hear you, and I think it's a great point. Unfortunately, right now we're at about an all-time high of where people would answer no to that question. A lot of people have lost confidence in their government for understandable reason. And they're very concerned that the future may not be better than their past. I mean, when you have a situation where debt is going up and savings is going down, that's the opposite of what you need to help create a better future. In fact, this morning I was watching a television program, it might have been CNBC, I'm not sure, where they were talking about people are now starting to use credit cards to buy groceries, which is a very troubling sign. You know, I mean, 70% of our economy is based on consumption. And when that consumption is based upon additional debt, especially when that debt is based on 20% plus credit card debt, annual APR, you got to. By the way, Rick, I saw that you were listed as one of the top 100 brightest people in the world on some.
It's just IQ. I'm mostly an idiot.
Well, whatever. But I was very impressed. So I just.
Thanks. There's a lot of BS in there, but.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, let's put it this way.
Rick,
I didn't see any of us on the list, but go ahead.
Rick, is it possible that you will be on the list of 100 biggest idiots as well?
You know, they don't have a measure of that.
I see.
But okay, but let me be an idiot right now. There's never been the best time to be poor in history is right now. I'd rather be poor today in America than a king 200 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
So our deficit is ridiculous. You know, half of America experiences economic uncertainty, but half of America still gets to have 60-inch televisions and sausage McMuffins. And if we can just muddle through into the future and technology will keep bringing us great stuff if, as you were saying, we can avoid revolution. We can just muddle through. England used to run the world, and then they screwed up, they lost it. You know, we run the world. If we screw up, we won't anymore, but things will still be, you know, it's still nice to live in England. It'll be nice to live in the US. It would be great if we could continue to run the world, but we just want to stop the world from falling apart so we can get the tech.
Okay. That's fair enough. But are we running into some problems in terms of solving the national debt problem? First of all, here's what I see, David. Neither party, the Republicans nor the Democrats, are addressing this 800-pound gorilla in the room, which is a $35 trillion national debt, let alone what Peter brought up, the $125 trillion potential debt in Social Security and Medicare. Neither party's addressing it, and the media is ignoring it. When and where and if are any of the parties ever going to address it, or are they just going to keep continuing to kick the can down the road? And ultimately, it's going to slap us in the face big time.
Nick, I'm sorry, but I think Trump addressed it. Trump is about, once he will be president, he will establish the huge US-based Bitcoin fund. And that Bitcoin, if it will go up to $1 million, which most of the experts agree upon, it will easily cover all US debts and Medicare and everything else. So at least one party is taking care of it.
Well,
so we're going to rely on Mr. Bankruptcy to get us out of.
Let's just say I'm not going to bet on that, especially since Bitcoin went down $10,000 in the last several days. But other than that, look, here's my concern. My concern is of the two major candidates that we have right now. One is focused on cutting taxes or maintaining tax cuts that are set to expire. And some of them probably should be extended, but not all of them. Okay. But his objective is to keep taxes as low as possible. We can define as possible, because what they have to think about is what are we going to do to stabilize debt to GDP at a reasonable level. The other one wants to grow government. The other candidate has all kinds of proposals to grow government even more. There's no way that we can afford to grow government anymore. Government has grown too big, promised too much, subsidized too many, lost control of the budget, is not managed for results. All right. And so what I'm trying to get the candidates to do, and I'm more hopeful that Trump will do it than Kamala Harris, is to acknowledge that we've got a problem and that we need to do three things. One, the president has to lead on this, tell the truth, lead the way towards tough choices. Secondly, we need a constitutional amendment that will limit how much debt as a percentage of the economy we can take on, like Switzerland and others have done, which will force tough choices and will not allow them to continue to mortgage our future and cause a crisis of confidence that could result in a global depression. And number three, that we've got to have a statutory fiscal commission where everything's on the table that will end up engaging the American people and making a package of recommendations that will facilitate a tough vote in Congress without them losing their job. So they don't have to get into the details of this is exactly what I want to do for Social Security. This is what I want to do on taxes. This is what I want to do on healthcare. But they have to recognize that we're not going to get this done through the regular order, and that we need to have some mechanisms that will force us to make tough choices and facilitate us being able to make those tough choices. So we'll see whether that happens. I've got several efforts underway to try to get to the candidates and talk to them about that. But what I do know is this: we can't grow government anymore. And secondly, we're going to have more revenues as a percentage of GDP. I'm going to add a third. And we're going to have to significantly reduce projected spending as compared to our current path. We're going to have to do those three things. The math doesn't work otherwise.
I'd like to come in and make something on the. I'd like to come in and make.
Why don't you control it, Nick? Go ahead.
Yeah, Rick, you're up.
Yeah, to go back to what you said, politicians won't talk about an issue if they don't have a solution and they can't blame the other side for it.
Mhm.
Tech has been eating jobs for 20 years, creating economic uncertainty and replacing good jobs with super crappy jobs like Uber driver. But politicians won't talk about it because there's no candy they can throw out to their viewers. So you have David talking about it, but David, you're not a politician.
Thank God.
That's
Nor do I want to.
Yeah. Peter, your comments.
Yeah, so a couple of points. One, we do need to raise revenues, and we need to do it in the most efficient way, but we have to be very cautious because history shows, I actually did my MBA thesis on this, that when you raise tax rates, a lot of times it reduces government revenues, and vice versa. If you look at Kennedy, Reagan, and Trump, all three of them actually reduced tax rates, but yet revenues increased. So it's a very fine line. What you really have to do is try to raise revenues in a way that does the least damage to government. And that takes the next level of thought, not just rates, but you have to start looking at specific things, cutting regulation and everything like that. Now, maybe you can answer this, but I maintain that, David, that and constitutional amendment politically might be a good effort, but I do not believe, and on my math says it, that there is no way you can ever do a constitutional amendment for balancing the budget. Why? Because let's say the number is 125 trillion. Well, I've looked at the entire value of the stock market, the U.S. stock market, the U.S. bond market, and all privately held real estate, and it almost comes up to 125 trillion. So if you took away everybody's stocks, everybody's houses, and everybody's bonds, and by the way, one more footnote on that is the world is in the exact same situation or worse. I've looked at pensions around the world, Canada, Russia, countries in Europe, South America, China. Their social security systems are about roughly, this is an overestimate, I believe it, they're about the same as the U.S. They're kind of mostly funded. They can probably manage it, but they're offering free health care to societies, and they put away no money. So this is a worldwide economic problem, not just the U.S. I point out, but in terms of balancing the budget, how can you do it? There's no way that you can do that. David, explain that.
Several things. Let me start with taxes. Okay. What we have to focus on is revenue as a percentage of GDP.
Definitely.
Okay. That's what we have to focus on. You're correct that several people ended up reducing tax rates, but in many cases, the tax rates were much higher than they are today. Okay. In Kennedy's time, the top marginal tax rate was much, much, much higher than it is today. Secondly, not all tax cuts stimulate the economy. Some do. All right. And very few tax cuts pay for themselves, in the sense of percentage of GDP. All right. You've got to keep in mind that there's something called inflation and there's something called bracket creep. And just because you end up generating more nominal dollar revenues after the cut takes place than before doesn't mean that you're generating more revenues as a percentage of GDP. Right now, we're generating below average revenues as a percentage of GDP as compared to post-World War II. At the same point in time, we are spending well in excess of the post-World War II average, and it's headed up. So the gap is getting greater. But what 82% of representative groups of voters agreed to on the 10 million a minute tour that I did, which is outlined in the book, American 2040, Still a Superpower, ? Is they agree that what we need to do is we need tax reform that significantly reduces and in most cases eliminates a lot of deductions, exemptions, credits, and exclusions in order to keep tax rates as low as possible. The illustration that was given was we want to keep the top marginal tax rate. Now this is in 2012, so we weren't as in bad a shape in 2012. Keep the top marginal tax rate at 28%. All right, dramatically reduce, a lot of the existing tax preferences in order to be able to do that. And if you can keep the top marginal tax rate down to 28%, then you can tax capital gains at the same rate as ordinary income without having a significant adverse, impact on economic growth. You're correct that you need to also do regulatory relief. The government is over-regulated. That's, in particular in the energy area right now, and also with regard to the green situation where, we've got to deal with that. Yes, climate change is real, but we're trying to do too much too fast, and we're not being smart with regard to how we're allocating the resources to that area.
If I could follow up, I just want to make one point first. 2 points. One, the follow-up question, but one. The efficiency of tax revenues is exactly what I meant, and that's really well put.
Exactly right. Yeah, exactly right.
It's about redesigning our tax system to make it so that it generates efficient tax revenues and continues to grow the economy. But the other part of my question, which I have to ask you, is the constitutional amendment. I know politically.
I'm about ready to hit that, but go ahead.
Okay, let's skip then. Somebody else.
Here's the deal.
Well, can I just make a comment on
let me answer the question. First, I do not advocate for a balanced budget amendment.
Okay.
I advocate for two things. There's a limit as to how much spending as a percentage of GDP the federal government ought to do. And there's a limit as how much debt as a percentage of the GDP the federal government should have. In the case of the latter, if you grow the denominator faster than the numerator, even if the numerator is going up, you're making progress.
Yeah.
That's what we did post-World War II. We're doing exactly the opposite now, which is compounded by the fact that demographics are now working against us. Our position in the world is not what it was at the end of World War II. And interest costs are our fastest growing expense, and healthcare costs grow faster than the economy. So, we can't do what we did at post-World War II, but we need to have the right metric. And I believe you can get bipartisan support for a debt to GDP approach. Even the defense and intelligence agencies, and I'm on one of the defense boards, would oppose a balanced budget amendment. Plus, 49 of 50 states have balanced budget amendments, but several of them are basket cases financially because they just talk about balancing cash flows. They don't consider unfunded retirement obligations, et cetera. So again, control the size of the federal government and control the amount of debt as a percentage of the economy. And if we do that, following the example of Switzerland, which was highly successful, that received 85% support from Swiss voters and is now part of their constitution, and they are in excellent shape as a result of that. So I think Shaq had his hand up first.
Shaq's next.
Just a couple of things. I just wanted to come back, if I can, a little bit to the wealth disparity. People accumulate assets over their lifetime, as Rick alluded to. So the fact that the top 1% owns 54%, the bottom 50% own 1%, well, yeah, an 18-year-old's not going to own as much assets as somebody who has been working for 40 years and is retired at 60. So, there's a lot of different things at play. I think mobility is a more important aspect of that. One of our viewers has made the comment about tax cuts for the rich. Well, in your country, you don't have a particularly broad tax base, so any type of tax cut is going to disproportionately benefit the rich because the rich are disproportionately the ones that are paying the taxes. If you have a look at your peer group in Europe and around the world, you'll find that they have a much flatter tax system, and so the benefits of tax cuts actually benefits everybody more reasonably. And just in relation to Switzerland, one of the arguably good things about Switzerland is that they have a much bigger direct participation, a direct democracy. And so major decisions are actually voted on directly by the people in a referendum style election thing that they do every couple of years. So that means that the country operates more in line with what the Swiss actually want. So look, there are a number of factors that I think are affecting the United States and the world markets at the moment. But I think that the idea that you're going to be able to fix the situation by increasing taxes on the wealthy, when the wealthy are already disproportionately contributing most of it. I think that the stats are that the top 10% pay 90% of the taxes in the US. I mean, no other country is doing that. And most other countries, I would argue, are getting better results as far as social services are provided and funded for the everyday person. But I would still stand by that. I think the thing that holds up opportunity in the US is an increase in government regulations. I think it makes it too difficult for people to want to try and start a business there. But I also think that one of the things that America needs to consider is that your strength is also your weakness. In that, why would a company who wants to manufacture goods employ Americans if the average wage in the United States, I think last time I checked, was around $60,000 to $70,000 US? That would imply that if I was an employer and I employed 3 people in the US, that's going to cost me $250,000 a year. Well, I can employ 100 people in a country like Kenya for the same price. Where would I rather go, even if the other country had substantially less efficient employees? So I think that America needs to become more advanced in the sorts of jobs that it's offering, more the jobs that have higher qualifications, things like that. Lastly, David, I apologise. I'm a bit lethargic today. I twisted my ankle over the weekend, and I'm on a pretty decent cocktail of painkillers at the moment. So
I agree with Shaq. We need a hyper-educated population. 100 years ago, President Calvin Coolidge said, "The chief business of the American people is business. We are profoundly concerned with producing, buying, selling, investing, and prospering in the world." And the way that, if you're going to pay somebody $70,000 or $100,000, they need to be worth it. The way to make them worth it is to make people educated, and we need to get more people involved in the economy. Right now, we have as many people making amateur pornography on OnlyFans in America as there are doctors in America. So the future is tech mediated, and we need to get more people out there.
You're also having an issue with an over investment into non-productive assets, and I think there are a number of reasons for it. But one of the reasons is because there's less risk. Why would you bother trying to create a new product or service or a new invention and then go through the many years of getting that approved, go through the risk of then going and setting up a factory, buying the equipment, buying the materials, producing that good, and then hoping that you can take it to market. Why bother doing that if you can simply buy stuff on the wholesale market at a discount and then sell it at a retail market? Why not just do that? Why bother trying to trying to create a new type of building when you can just go and buy an existing building and rent it out? There's a lot of things like that where people are just not bothering. And look, I fall into that category. Why would I bother setting up a new business if I can just go and buy and sell some shares? The markets have fallen pretty precipitously over the last week or so. It hasn't hurt me at all. In fact, I've benefited from it. So why would I bother trying to set up a business and employ 20 people? For what benefit to me? It doesn't make my life any easier. It just makes it more stressful, more complicated. I've got to have more lawyers and tax people and business insurances and all the rest of it. And that's what we're seeing. And that's a big part of the reason why I think that gap is getting to a point where people at the bottom who are at the bottom for in their 30s and 40s and they still haven't been able to make it feel as though they can't really get there because they don't know how to get there. They think that they can get there by coming up with some great idea. That's not how you generally will build wealth for most people.
Mark, you have a comment?
Yep, I had a couple of quick questions, but one of them was based on the conversation that I had mentioned earlier today that I had with the gentleman that runs the California Black Chamber of Commerce, Jay King, and all along those lines. But he brought up an interesting question. I'd love to hear Dave's thoughts about this, and then I've got another question about a potential Trump policy that's about there. But one of the things that he mentioned in our conversation on Saturday was this notion that when you go to investors, kind of what Shaquille was talking about and everything, a lot of people are afraid to admit that they don't have the money to go into investments and everything along those lines. So rather than actually admitting that they can't invest, they will just kind of evade the question because a lot of people don't have the money to invest. A lot of people don't have $1,000 if an emergency came about, much less to invest in a product and everything. So he found that a number of people that if you go to them, they will try to kind of snowball you into letting you think that they have more than they actually have, and all in that space. So I was wondering, is that part of the problem? Is that we have a number of people that are afraid to admit what their own financial situations are? Because that's what Jay King was telling me, was that when he's gone to people, a lot of people are afraid to even admit that they don't have the money to invest and will try to kind of con the people into actually staying engaged with them. But I was just wondering your take on that, and then I've got a question about a Trump policy as well. But what's your take on that?
Our savings rate is low.
Mhm.
We have a higher percentage of people who are living paycheck to paycheck
Exactly.
because now real wages have started to go up, but they're down from where they were 3.5 years ago. Okay. Inflation rates are coming down, but prices aren't coming down. Cumulative inflation is 21% since January of 2021, but it's much higher for things like energy, food, rent, insurance, things that everybody has to have, irrespective of your economic status. And then, people are obviously embarrassed to the extent that they're having to live paycheck to paycheck. People are probably embarrassed to the extent that they have very little savings and don't even have enough. I mean, the first thing you have to do is have enough for an emergency fund, right? Most people don't even have enough for an emergency fund, much less additional funds to be able to invest. And frankly, it also relates to politics. Sometimes people invest to say who they're for, in politics, right? But
and that's basically what Jay was saying.
Yeah,
that's basically what Jay was saying, is that too many people are embarrassed to admit what their true economic situation is and everything, and they are afraid to admit it, and sometimes they will try to hide what their true economic situation is. But the follow-up question I had, which was the Trump policy, and then I'll be quiet for the rest of the show, is this whole notion of tariffs on imports, because that is something that Trump had said that he was proposing, with this whole notion of 100% tariff on imported cars. Is that something that can actually work? You're in this economic space and everything, so I was just wondering your take on that, because I know a number of my friends that have various cars, and some of them are imports and everything. So can we actually effectively do an import on cars coming from, say, France or England or some of these other places, or Japan?
He wasn't talking. He wasn't talking about doing it from England. He was talking about putting a tariff on goods coming from countries that he feels are not treating the United States fairly.
Right. And I think that's an important point. Having broad-based tariffs obviously doesn't make sense. But what he's talking about, and he needs to provide more clarity, okay, is he's talking about imposing tariffs on certain goods from certain countries who, in his view, are not playing fairly. Okay, there's a difference between free trade and fair trade. Okay, and let me tell you one thing that most people don't know: before we had an income tax, Mark, the vast majority of revenues for the federal government came from tariffs.
Right.
Which I think we might be at a point now where tariffs and excise taxes might be a reasonable way of going. The reason I say that is because your tax system in the United States is just so complicated and unnecessarily so. You know, a lot of people that advocate for more socialized services in the US try to compare the sorts of services that are given in Sweden. I've talked about this before. In order to be at the top tax rate, you only need to earn 1.5 times the median income. So, you know, you have a much broader base of people. You don't have, 20 different progressive tax rates. It doesn't make sense. If you have a look at Australia and New Zealand, another great example of this, prior to COVID, Australia had progressive rates of tax. We had a capital gains tax which was at 50%, same as you guys, off your marginal rate. And we have a national sales tax or consumption tax. New Zealand had a higher level of consumption tax. They had a flat income tax at 30%, and they had no capital gains tax at all. And as a percentage of the GDP, New Zealand always outperformed Australia. We would get around 27%, they would get around 33%. So the idea that in order to increase government revenue, if we're not going to talk about spending, if the idea is to increase government revenue is to increase the tax take, why would you try to increase it by doing the very same thing that you know doesn't work? It's already not working, and in no other country has that type of progressive income tax ever resulted in a higher level of government revenue.
Well,
Simply.
Shaq, I'll mention one thing, then we'll open it back up. Most economists will tell you that the most efficient and equitable tax system would be a progressive consumption tax.
But how do you do that? If you were to model that system on the way that non-dom rules work in the UK, I think that would actually be a good idea. I think that you get a broad-based consensus for a progressive consumption tax. But people use cash, so if you're going to do that, you're going to have to work out a way to be able to do it. As I said, the way that non-dom rules work in the UK, you could apply something like that by having people have two different accounts, and a transfer of capital from one account to the other would incur a tax. A transfer back would perhaps have a deduction to it. That could work quite well. I think there are other ways of doing it as well. Henry George obviously talked about there being a land tax. I don't think it could be as simple as that, but something that you could potentially incorporate in. More recent economists have talked about a thing called a wealth increase tax, which is that if your wealth increases for any reason, you will pay some sort of tax on that increase in your wealth. But it's a low increase. He was proposing something like a 10 or 15% flat tax across the board would knock out all of the other taxes that you have, and then you just have government taxes where they're trying to discourage activities such as alcohol and smoking and fuel, things like that.
They actually have a net worth tax in Spain, which I'll be broadcasting and moving to next month. It's a real pain in the neck, Shaquille, but they have a net worth tax in Spain.
So I wouldn't suggest a net worth tax. That's not something that I'd suggest, although in Switzerland that can work reasonably well depending on who you are. But the other thing I'll say, and I've been saying this probably a bit sloppily the last few times I've been on, is the US should be focusing as well on who they're trying to bring in. The fact that you Nick, are moving to Spain, right? You're not planning on doing anything productive in Spain. When I go to Europe and other places, I don't do things that are particularly productive. why on earth don't the big, powerful legacy countries, Australia, the UK, US, Canada, etc., and some other countries in Europe, why don't you have a retirement visa? You've got wealthy people around the world that would love to come traveling around the US. You've got 6-month visas for the snowbirds in Canada. Why would you not want people who are wealthy, who come to your country and say, I've got no intention of working, I don't want to do anything, I just want to be able to travel your country and go see the sites? Let them in. That's cheap money for you,
which we like.
As long as they pay for the visa, I want them in.
Exactly right. It's a cheap way for you to get revenue. You'd have to give them exemptions so you're not taxing them all over the world. Just take the revenue. Let them have extended holidays. But we're not doing that. So what we're actually seeing is people who are middle class will often say, look, I own a house, I've got a bit of a retirement plan, maybe I've got 500,000 or 600,000. I'm not going to be able to enjoy that nicer life here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to sell my house and I'm going to go and live in Thailand or, just South America or all these different places where their dollar is going to carry them a lot further. So why don't you reverse that and try to attract the very wealthy into our country?
It's definitely a good idea. Shaquille, Kim has been trying to get her turn, so I think we should let Kim talk.
Well, I think that there's a lot of issues going on here. I listened to a conversation analysis about the tariff raising that Trump has, threatened, whether it's a good thing or not a good thing. And one of the things I like about some of these analysis shows is they actually list what is good about it and what is bad about it. And the pros, hey, you're giving back what they're dishing at you. The cons, are, will this cause a bigger conflict between us and the other countries? Some people don't care. But what it does impact is what will be the cost to the products for the consumers in the country, because the cost will go up. Now, does that force us to start, manufacturing these products in our country? I don't know, because, we've outsourced so much to other countries. So I think before, we sit there and, knee-jerk a situation to go, okay, we're going to do this to you because you do this to us, which, sounds good. But I think what we need to do is analyze the pros and cons, which there have been some analysts doing. And I love listening to them talk about the pros and cons. And I think if we sat down and listed them and analyzed them, then you can come up with an answer of what would be good in raising a tariff and by how much and why. But I think more important, what we need to take a look at is, some of the things that we did talk about in the past was, what is going on with the mortgage interest rates. And this morning, it has just been the phone ringing off the hook. And we are going to be starting a show with two very intelligent people on this subject matter that will help guide people get rid of bad credit so that they can get loans. But, as we have been talking about, when will it happen? Because Powell said that he would do it. But as I was told, this isn't just about the Federal Reserve controlling this. This is a lot of things impact this. The stock market is going down. Why did that happen? And then all of a sudden, the interest rates go down. So, there's a huge educational process that would be nice to understand, but we just don't have time to do it. But nonetheless, the mortgage rates are very much down today, and you can buy them down even more per the conversation that I had prior to the shows this morning. So it's all very exciting for some people, but I think David is right on the other issue. The cost of living expenses are still so very high. And I think it's because nobody just took the time to regulate and cap some of the utility cost that regulates what happens and causes these things. The cause and effect just are never weighed. Gas prices going astronomically high will, of course, cause you to pay more in groceries down the road and more for your consumer products, which slows down purchasing from the citizens of this country. So these are things that need to be looked at. Nobody's ever regulated the cost of gas and oil, and I think it needs to be done. I think when you regulate it properly, and stop letting them price gouge us so that they can line their pockets with profits, which is what they've been doing the last 3 to 4 years since COVID. I think that there's a big issue by not regulating that. But David, you're right. People are having to resort to credit just for their cost of living right now, and something needs to be done about it, including students who graduated with such high debts that they're higher than mortgages. All the while you got PPP loans, people who received those that never had to pay them back, and they're living the life of luxury and not having to pay back such debts, hurt our country more than it helped them.
Kim, first of all,
Just want to say that was money out of my pocket. So
first
the
of
tax
all,
loans, student loans weren't. Go ahead.
you finished?
Yes, sorry.
Thanks. First of all, in Soviet Union, the prices for oil and gas, as much as everything else, were heavily regulated, and we know the end of Soviet Union. Okay. Number two, about tariffs. So the idea is for Trump and Republicans is to have smaller government, more efficient government, all that stuff. Wonderful. Now, when you collect tariffs, as much as 60% was proposed in certain cases, where this money going, this 60%? They are being collected by the US government, and they will be administered by US government. This 60% are coming from the taxpayers. So taxpayers would have to pay 60% extra for whatever Chinese or anybody else's electric car or anything else. That money goes into government from the pocket of the taxpayers. Please, anybody here, explain it.
I'll jump in on that. Sasha, admittedly, increased tariffs, which I am in favor of, but in a gradual and selected way, as David discussed. It's not a 60% dollar for dollar trade-off, because let's say we really increased 60%, Chinese tariff 60% today. Well, that would encourage U.S. production or other countries' production also to compete. So China would lose business, but U.S. would substitute and increase production, and it wouldn't be a dollar for dollar. But it would cost consumers some money. On the other side, there's huge geopolitical things at stake, especially with China.
Peter, you're missing my point. My point is that it's very simple exercise of taxpayers' dollars going directly into U.S. government. So it completely defeats the wonderful purpose of the government to be smaller, more efficient, or so. Because now they will end up with controlling.
But what I'm saying is
hold on.
Let me from China.
Yeah, let me jump in here. Okay.
All right.
Here's my understanding of how it works, and then somebody can jump in if you don't. It would be a targeted tariff on certain goods from certain countries. You're correct, Sasha, that the revenue would go to the government. To the extent that individuals continue to buy those same goods,
right,
then the consumers who buy those same goods would be paying more. But part of the whole idea is that they're not going to be able to sell as many of those goods. All right. And that and that we and others will do things to become more competitive. All right. To moderate the impact on the consumer. But ultimately the consumer pays for tariffs. I mean, I don't think
David,
this is an issue. This is an issue that's been going back and forth.
Hold on. There is a contradiction still remains that all the wonderful idea as to suppress Chinese, for example, sale of their goods into the United States, this is fabulous idea. It's a great idea. And who is going to finance that? It's a U.S. consumer. It's a U.S. taxpayer. So what you do, you collect money from taxpayers into the government. What is government going to do with this money? Is this money going to be returned to taxpayers in one or some other ways? I don't see that.
But Sasha, this is already what we've seen. I mean, we've seen in the past, we've seen the US government agencies pay farmers to grow more tobacco and then pay farmers to burn or to reduce the amount of tobacco they're growing. And we have seen governments in the United States waste money all the time. But the age-old issue is going to be this at the end of the day. If I'm a T-shirt manufacturer and I have a factory in the United States, and I'm struggling to compete because the wages are a little bit lower in Canada, that's fair enough. That's free market. But if what I'm being told by unions is I need to provide a certain amount of sick days and I've got to provide, all these different benefits and safe working conditions, et cetera, all things that we say are important to us. And then you've got factories located in other countries that don't have to do any of that. So their advantage doesn't just become because they have a lower dollar, but their advantage comes because they have worse conditions than what I'm required to have, or maybe that's unfair. Now, does the consumer have to end up paying for that? Well, yes, because you either want to advocate for more jobs in your country, in which case the consumer has to pay for it, or you're prepared to let those jobs go and have less businesses there and have a less robust industry in the United States and other Western countries, in return for cheaper goods coming from countries where we're going to turn a blind eye to them not treating their employees at the same standards that we would be expecting to have here
Right.
in the West.
It's a
One, to
business
go back, hold on,
to hold on
on.
what the conditions are working in Chinese. Is that U.S. business? Sorry, it was good 30, 40 years ago when U.S. was a real superpower.
I don't think it was.
And it's not
I don't
U.S.
think it's good there either. I don't think it's good there either. But if you're going to put me, because I have a T-shirt factory, if you're going to put me out of business, and you're going to put all of us T-shirt manufacturers or steel workers out of business, okay, because of environmental concerns or whatever it may be, there's only two things you can really do. Well, there's only a handful of things you can really do. You can put a tariff on imported goods. You can give a direct subsidy to the industry, or you can put restrictions on. Okay, and or you can try and put price caps on the stuff coming in. Now, price caps I don't think work in any environment. What are you going to do? Or you can just simply stand and say, we're not going to do anything, but we're going to continue to allow other countries who are not trade. He's not talking about putting a trade restriction on Australian goods. He's not talking about putting a trade restriction on Japanese goods. He's talking about putting trade restrictions on certain countries that, in his view, presumably, are breaking the rules and treating the United States unfairly. And the idea that you're gonna move motor vehicle manufacturing to Mexico and then bring them across the border, yeah, if I was American, I'd be unhappy about that.
I think Rick and then Kim.
All right, so two things. One, to go back to what Kim said about the oil companies, I don't think you can regulate oil prices. You could try to reduce the billions in subsidies that oil companies receive from the federal government. I don't think you can do that either because oil lobbyists and their contributions own the politicians. Second thing, an easy thing for the federal government to do for people that would provide a little relief is do what some countries do and calculate your federal taxes for you. Every year at tax time, you get an invoice, you disagree with it, you fill in where you think it's wrong. Along with it, you get a report card of what percent you're paying in federal taxes, Social Security withholding, Medicare, and you see where it's going. If people saw what percent of their taxes are going towards interest on the national debt, they might get worked up about it.
Mike? Yeah, Kim.
Well, there are efforts to try to increase transparency in some of that. Kim.
David, and I always try to take a look at who actually will benefit from the tariffs being raised, because we know the consumers and the citizens, the hardworking Americans, and the poverty will carry the weight of any cost increase, but who benefits?
Well, you'd make the argument that if all of society ends up with more jobs, then everybody benefits, right? But, because then you can make the argument about the velocity of money around the economy and things like that. But as I said, at the end of the day, what you've got is a middle class that want to be able to buy goods for very cheap prices. They're not going to buy American built goods and manufactured goods because it costs too much. So they want cheap prices, but they also want to have good paying jobs for themselves. It just doesn't work like that.
Yeah, but you're also
Good point,
assuming
Shaquille.
that-
You know what?
Well, my question was for
Let me add something.
David. My question was for David. Who benefits, David?
Well, the people who benefit are presumably the people who can be employed that otherwise wouldn't be able to be employed, and the people who end up owning the companies that stay in business rather than going out of business. But again, I think we have to keep in mind here that this proposal, as I understand it, is targeted to selected goods in selected countries. And what it's intended to do is to do two things. One, create a more level playing field, all right, that's likely to reduce the demand for the selected goods from selected countries and provide an incentive for there to be more job opportunities in the United States and elsewhere to be able to be more competitive with regard to price as compared to those selected goods from selected countries. It's targeted. That's my understanding.
But also the cost may not go up. Like I'm here with a convention of people from Vietnam, and the Vietnamese hate the Chinese. This is they love the Americans, and so if you imposed a tariff on China, the Vietnamese would sell more goods to the Americans. And we wouldn't even manufacture them here. Those T-shirts that Shaquille talks about, we just buy the T-shirts from Vietnam rather than China.
And that's already starting to happen.
Even the Make America Great Again shirts are imported by a company in Duluth and made in Mexico. And I think, from memory, my I'm With Her shirt was made in Bangladesh. I can't quite remember. I'm not sure what the shirt is now. I mean, and here was your two candidates.
They're manufacturing from China to the U.S. When Biden took office. That was a huge thing. So they didn't have to manipulate a lot of things to do that. Ford did bring back their manufacturing to the United States, and they're building manufacturing facilities. The Blue Oval in Tennessee. So, I mean, there are a lot of things that are happening that I just don't think get a lot of credibility.
But Kimberly, so here's the thing, right? There's a certain element of a price of a good which is related to the cost of labor. With more automation, you actually need less labor. So what some of these companies are doing, and this was under Trump and under Biden, is they're bringing back jobs. And they're saying, hey, we're going to bring back 1,000 jobs, which sounds like a lot. But actually, given the amount of product they're going to produce, it isn't that much. And they don't do it just out of the kindness of their heart. They're going to get a massive tax subsidy from somewhere, probably from the federal government. The state government's going to give them one because they can walk around and speak to every governor until they get some great deal. Like, they're not just doing it because the corporations are lovely or because President whoever has come up with some great plan. That's just not how big business works.
Well, I'm just saying Ford has done it and the other companies should be doing it. And, just because you shouldn't have to go around raising tariffs to bring work back into a country, just do more incentives.
Well,
who's going to pay for the subsidies then?
We almost have to get done. We have to come back to something called evidence-based decision-making, including for things like education, including for things like immigration policy. There's a number of these things that, quite frankly, we are not well aligned for the future. And that needs to change.
Right.
Thank you.
So can I say one thing there? If you want to put incentives on to have big businesses come into your country or come back to your country, didn't you guys just complain before about the wealthy getting all the tax subsidies and the wealthy not paying their fair share? Like, what do you want? You think the poor people are going to go set those businesses up? You think it was poor people that were going and investing in the opportunity zones? Of course not. So what do you want? You wanted to have that tax, minimum tax, because people weren't paying their taxes because they put money into tax-free bonds.
We're out of time, but we'll discuss that next time on economics with the Honorable David M. Walker.
Bye-bye.
Take care around the world. Bye-bye.